Hey guys, I just wanted to do a video on Islamic occasionalism and determinism. And basically, well, the idea of these things first seem to have arisen in Islamic history with the Asharite school. And we mentioned that before. This book we had made reference to, where he discusses the history of Islamic philosophy when it began to encounter the Greek philosophers and Christians and Jewish religious beliefs and apologetical type interactions, that they developed their own. So the Asharite school held to the idea that Allah was supreme will, and that in conjunction with this, they believed that his essence was distinct from his attributes. So there's no just nature. Allah is not bound by any nature, and so he's free to do whatever he wants to do. And so they saw if he had some type of permanent attributes, that would be limiting him. So he would have to be just if he has a just nature, or he would have to be rational if he's bound by some nature. And so they said that he transcends these, and his essences and his attributes were not connected. So in other words, and of course we discussed before about how they get into some other issues which we're not going to address here, but about how his attributes are almost like suits of clothes, if you will. But then the question is, are they created, or are they eternal? And if they're eternal, how are they eternal with Allah, and they're not Allah? Because Allah is pure will, the idea of determinism would come in. And determinism is what most people think of when they hear the word predestination. They hear the biblical word predestination and think that that's referring to divine determinism, where God makes everything happen that happens, and it could not have happened in any other way. And that's sort of what they believe. They think that if Allah isn't making it happen, if there's some type of independent activity from men or from creatures, that limits Allah in some way. And so because he's unlimited in his will and not restricted, then he is the one that directly causes everything that comes to pass, even to the point of making men sin. There's a hadith which we'll show you that references Allah as taking responsibility for causing men to commit adultery. But everything that happens is directly caused by Allah, and he may use an intermediate, they say like an angel or something, but it's him causing it to come to pass. And so they say that that's necessary, because if there's any independent person that's doing things, that would mean that they are cooperating or co-creating activity with Allah, and they can't have that. There's no partners or anybody that's working with Allah, and so it has to be absolute determinism. The other product of the idea of that Allah is unrestrained pure will is what's called occasionalism. And occasionalism is the idea that Allah is recreating and creating and recreating every moment. So it's a broken succession each moment that he creates out of nothing. And so what that does is that eliminates any causation. So what we perceive as cause and effect, they would say, is just Allah's habit. And there's no connection, because he creates out of nothing. There's no connection between Allah creating in one moment, and then if you throw a ball, the next moment it appears that you've thrown the ball, but all it was is Allah made your hand move, and then he made it appear as if the ball is moving at a particular arc through space and time, but that's not really happening, because Allah is recreating each moment. And so they'll say that if Allah were to permit something to exist, that would in some way limit him. So if Allah is not creating it moment by moment, then he has a particular nature, and he's bound to permit it to have this nature, and he could be predictable. You would know what's going to happen, because there'd be uniformity in nature, and there'd be causal connections, and so because that limits Allah as voluntaristic tendencies, and that he's not bound by anything, and that's, we pointed out before, that's indicated by the fact that he said he could destroy Jesus and Mary. We'll give you the reference as well. But if he could destroy Jesus and Mary in their conception of Jesus, obviously not the biblical conception of Jesus, who is God, God in the flesh, the Son of God, which they reject and call blasphemy. But in their conception of Jesus as a righteous, one of the most righteous men, then if Allah could destroy him, then he's not bound by any covenants, he's not bound by any laws, or he's not bound by anything. Even if he makes a promise, he's not obligated to keep it. He's not bound by anything. He's not even bound by his own nature. So the occasionalism is the idea that they say follows from the fact that it would limit Allah if he were to create a thing. And just to contrast this with the scriptures, the Bible teaches God created in 6 days, and the seventh day he rested or ceased from his creating activities. And Allah, he never stops creating. It's a continual series. The issue with this, the issue that this creates rationally, if God creates something and it exists, then it has a particular essence to it. And that particular essence is subject to the laws of thought, which we, of course, trace back to the Christian God. But that a thing is what it is because he's designed it and he created it, and it has its essence because it's made for his purposes. So it maintains its essence by his will, by his creation, but you can actually reason about it. You can make reasonable judgments about it. You can apply the law of identity to it. You can say, well, this is this particular thing. It has a particular characteristics or attributes that are essential to it. And so you can apply the law of identity to it. But if it's being recreated each moment and it breaks that uniformity, then you don't know the next moment that Allah created it that it has any characteristics that match the previous characteristics. That would be an assumption, but it would be an unwarranted assumption. You can't assume that you know that Allah is creating it in the same way so that you could apply reason to it. And if you can't apply the law of identity to it, you can't apply the law of contradiction to it. It has to be related in some way in order for it to be a contradiction. Something can't contradict if it's not related. So if there's no connection between something, if it's not in the same category, then you can't say it's a contradiction. So if Allah is creating and recreating from one second to the next, then you don't know that it is, you don't know the nature of it. You can't say anything is a contradiction. You couldn't apply any laws of logic to anything, even your sense perception. If you said, well, my sense perceptions are caused by the external world, well, you don't know, because if Allah is creating from moment to moment, he's creating your sense perceptions in correspondence with the thing that is existing, but you don't know any existence of the thing because you're only acquainted with your sense perception. If there's no causation, there's no causal laws because there's no uniformities, or there's no essential or essence of anything in nature, then you couldn't say that it was the cause of your sense perceptions, because there would be no causation. So you couldn't trust your sense perceptions. You couldn't interpret them properly. You couldn't apply laws of logic to experience. You couldn't apply to your sense perceptions. And so to believe in occasionalism or to believe in determinism would destroy your ability to know the truth of those beliefs. So, for example, in determinism, if I said, well, the only reason I know something is because Allah makes me believe it, but I don't know if it's true or not. All I know is that I'm experiencing this in this moment, this belief, because Allah is forcing me to believe it. But I can't say that I know it, because he could force me to believe contradictory things as well, and I would believe that they were true as well. So determinism destroys the ability to know anything, for sure. It undermines epistemology, how knowledge is possible. But so does occasionalism, because it makes it to where the laws of logic don't apply to the material world or to your sense perceptions. So it completely guts how knowledge would be possible. It undermines how you could even know those things, occasionalism and determinism themselves, or voluntarism. If Allah is voluntaristic, he does whatever he wants, whenever he wants, then you don't know what he's doing. He might be deceiving you, which he's the greatest of schemers, it says. So it undermines epistemology, and a lot of times this sort of destruction of rational thought leads to mysticism, and this is what we see in the occult as well. Like Aleister Crowley, after having thought that he had rejected empiricism and rationalism, introduced mysticism or the mystical experience as the way to understand and to know things. So that's what ultimately these things lead to. They lead to the destruction of knowledge and into the entrance of the mystical experience as final authority. So let me know what you think in the comments below, all right?